She woke up before the alarm rang. The room was still dark, quiet in a way that made every small sound feel loud. Her heart was already beating fast, not from fear, but from the weight of the day ahead. This was the day she had imagined for years. The day she believed would change how people saw her, maybe even how she saw herself. She sat up slowly and looked around the small room. The walls were plain, the furniture old, but clean. Nothing fancy. She had worked hard to keep it neat, even when money was tight. Today, she wanted everything to feel right. Even if her life was far from perfect, she stood by the window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the city was waking up. Buses passed by, shopkeepers lifted metal shutters, and a soft morning light touched everything. It felt like a sign, a new beginning. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself that today would be different. For a long time, she had been invisible to most people. She worked, came home, paid bills, and kept going without complaints. Others seemed to move ahead in life while she stayed in the same place. But this day was supposed to be her moment, a moment where all her effort would finally be seen. She walked to the mirror and studied her reflection. Her face showed signs of tiredness, but her eyes carried hope. She smiled, practicing the expression she would wear later. Not too proud, not too nervous. Just confident enough. The clothes she had chosen were carefully placed on the chair the night before. She touched the fabric gently, afraid of wrinkling it. She had saved for months to afford them. Every small sacrifice, every skipped meal, every extra hour of work had led to this. As she dressed, her hands trembled slightly. She told herself to calm down. Everyone gets nervous on important days, she thought. This only meant it mattered. Her phone buzzed with a message from someone reminding her not to be late. She replied with a short message and put the phone down. She didn't want to get lost in thoughts or distractions. She needed focus. In the kitchen, she tried to eat, but couldn't finish much. The tea grew cold as she stared at the table. Memories from the past came back without warning. Times when things had gone wrong. Days when she had trusted the moment too much, only to be disappointed. She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. Today is not like those days, she told herself. Today is mine. Before leaving, she checked her bag again and again. Documents, keys, phone. Everything was there. Still, she checked once more. Fear has a way of making people doubt even the obvious. As she stepped outside, the air felt heavier. The street noise grew louder. People walked past her without noticing, each lost in their own world. She wondered how many of them were carrying silent hopes like hers. On the bus, she found a seat by the window. The ride felt longer than usual. Every stop made her anxious. She kept looking at the time, counting minutes, planning what she would say, how she would stand, how she would smile. Her mind replayed conversations she hadn't even had yet. What if she said the wrong thing? What if they misunderstood her? What if all her preparation still wasn't enough? She closed her eyes and took slow breaths. She reminded herself of how far she had come. No one had handed her anything easily. She had learned to stand on her own, even when it hurt. When she got off the bus, the place was already busy. People dressed neatly walked in and out of the building. Some looked confident, others nervous like her. She felt a strange mix of comfort and fear, knowing she wasn't alone in feeling this way. She stood outside for a moment, gathering courage. This was it. The door she had been waiting to walk through. As she entered, the air inside felt different. Too cold, too serious. The sound of footsteps echoed on the floor. She followed the signs, her heels making soft noises that seemed louder than they should. She noticed how people glanced at her, some quickly, some longer. She couldn't tell if they were judging or just curious. Her shoulders stiffened, but she kept walking. While waiting, she sat on a chair and held her bag tightly. Her leg bounced without her noticing. She tried to focus on the positive. Soon, this waiting would be over. Soon, she would finally breathe freely. She remembered the promises she had made to herself years ago, that she wouldn't give up, that she would prove she was capable, that one day she would walk into a place like this without fear. A voice called out a name that wasn't hers. Someone stood and walked away. Time moved slowly, almost cruelly. Each second felt stretched. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. Right now, nothing else mattered. Finally, her turn came. She stood up, smoothing her clothes, fixing her posture. This was the moment she had imagined so many times. As she walked forward, she had no idea that this very day, which began with so much hope, was quietly preparing to turn her life upside down. She believed she was walking toward success. She didn't know she was stepping closer to heartbreak, and she definitely didn't know that this day, it's meant to be remembered for joy, would soon become the one she would never forget for an entirely different reason. She stepped into the room with her head held high, even though her chest felt tight. The space was larger than she expected, filled with chairs, tables, and people who looked like they belonged there. The air smelled faintly of paper and strong coffee. Everything felt serious, official, and a little unforgiving. She took the seat she was told to take and placed her bag carefully on the floor. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers locked together. She reminded herself to breathe. Slow in, slow out. This was still her day. Nothing bad had happened yet. Across the room, a few people talked quietly. Others stared at their phones. Some looked confident, laughing softly, while others looked just as nervous as she felt. She tried not to compare herself, but it was hard. Doubt crept in, whispering that she did not belong among them. Her name was called. The sound echoed in her ears. She stood up quickly, almost too quickly, and followed the voice. Every step felt heavier than the last. She felt eyes on her back. Or maybe that was just her imagination. Inside, the conversation began politely. Questions were asked. She answered carefully, choosing her words with care. She spoke about her experience, her efforts, and her hopes. At first, everything seemed fine. She even felt a small spark of confidence returning. Then the tone shifted. One question led to another, sharper this time. A document was lifted, brows were furrowed, and a pause stretched too long. Her heart sank. She tried to explain, but the room felt colder now. The smiles disappeared, replaced by looks she couldn't read. She felt her throat dry up. Words that had sounded perfect in her head now felt weak as they left her mouth. She sensed something slipping away, something she couldn't control. A quiet discussion happened between the people across from her. They spoke softly, but the silence felt loud. When they looked back at her, their expressions were firm, distant. They told her there was a problem. The words didn't hit her all at once. At first, she didn't fully understand. She asked them to explain again, her voice calm, but trembling. They did, slower this time, pointing out something she had missed. Something small, but important enough to stop everything. Her mind raced. She searched her memory, trying to understand how she could have overlooked it. She had checked everything so many times. How could this be happening now? She asked if there was a solution, a way to fix it, a chance to correct the mistake. The answer came gently, but it still hurt. No, not today. The room felt like it was closing in. Her ears rang. She nodded, even though her body wanted to protest. She thanked them, because that was what polite people did. Even when their world was cracking, she stood up and walked out, her legs weak but moving. The door closed behind her with a soft sound that felt final. Outside, the noise of the building rushed back. Voices, footsteps, phones ringing. Life continued as if nothing had happened, as if her moment had not just collapsed. She walked toward the waiting area, but couldn't bring herself to sit. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry there. Not in front of everyone. People passed her, some smiling, some upset. Someone laughed nearby. The sound felt sharp, almost cruel. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay steady. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She left the building without looking back. Outside, the sky looked the same as before. Too normal. She had expected the world to reflect how she felt inside. But it didn't. She walked without direction, her feet carrying her forward, while her mind replayed every second, every word, every mistake. She blamed herself again and again. How could she have been so careless? How could she have hoped so much? Her phone buzzed in her bag. She didn't answer. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want sympathy or questions. Right now, she just wanted to disappear. She found a quiet bench a few streets away and sat down heavily. Her shoulders slumped. The strength she had carried all morning drained away. Tears finally came, slow and silent at first. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed even though no one was paying attention. She thought of all the sacrifices she had made, all the nights she had stayed awake worrying, all the times she had told herself that this day would make everything worth it. Now, it felt like a joke. Her big day had turned into something she wanted to forget. A memory that would follow her, reminding her of failure. She stared at the ground, feeling small. She wondered what she would tell people, how she would explain coming back empty-handed. The fear of being judged hurt almost as much as the disappointment itself. She stood up suddenly, unable to sit there any longer. She needed to move, to do something, even if she didn't know what. As she walked, she noticed a small shop ahead. The lights inside were warm. Without thinking too much, she stepped in. The smell of fresh bread and hot food filled the air. It was comforting, unexpected. She ordered something simple and sat in a corner. For a few minutes, she just existed, eating slowly, staring out the window. The world outside kept moving, unaware of her pain. She didn't know it yet. But this simple decision to step inside would soon change everything. Right now, she only knew one thing. The day she had trusted so much had broken her heart, and she had no idea how she would put herself back together again. She sat in the small shop, feeling both tired and hollow. The warmth around her was comforting, yet it highlighted how cold the world had seemed outside. She stared at the steaming cup in front of her, letting the aroma fill her senses. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it grounded her. The door opened, and a man walked in. He looked ordinary at first glance, nothing striking about him, but there was a quiet presence that made her notice. He had a child with him, holding a small hand as they stepped inside. The boy looked curious, a bit shy, and he clutched a worn backpack. She watched them as they found a table. The man's movements were gentle, careful. There was patience in how he guided the boy to sit and how he smiled when the boy spoke. Something in the scene felt familiar and comforting, though she couldn't place why. A few moments later, the boy dropped a napkin. Without thinking, she picked it up and handed it to him. Their eyes met for a brief second. He nodded in thanks, and she smiled faintly before looking away. The man noticed her glance. He gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement, and returned his attention to the boy. She felt a strange sense of ease. It's like someone understood without needing words. Minutes passed, and she found herself watching them, almost unaware. The boy laughed at something small, the man said. That laugh was pure, unguarded. It reminded her of innocence she had long buried under responsibility and stress. She hadn't realized how much she missed seeing happiness without complications. The man glanced her way again, and this time he smiled slightly. Not a smile of pity, but one of understanding. It felt as if he saw through her carefully held composure to the person who had been hurt and overwhelmed just moments ago. When the boy got up to get a glass of water, she found herself speaking before she could stop it. He's very lucky to have you. The words came out soft, almost hesitant. The man looked surprised for a second, then nodded. I do my best, he said simply. His voice carried calmness, honesty, and a subtle strength that made her feel less alone. She sat back, unsure why she felt compelled to stay and talk, but something inside told her this was a safe place. They spoke lightly at first, about everyday things. The boy returned and sat quietly but occasionally chimed in, and their conversation became warmer, more natural. She realized she hadn't smiled fully since the morning. And now, in this quiet shop, watching this small family dynamic, she felt a flicker of hope. Not for her big day, not for the plans that had fallen apart, but for herself. For being seen even by a stranger, the man shared a little about his own struggles. He was a single dad, balancing work and care for his child. He spoke not with complaints, but with honesty, with acceptance of the challenges life had given him. She listened, drawn in by the simplicity and truth in his words. She felt compelled to share some of her own story. Not the full details, just enough for him to understand the weight she had been carrying. Her voice shook slightly, but he listened without judgment. Each word released a bit of the tension she had been holding all day. Time passed almost unnoticed. Outside, the world moved quickly, but inside the shop created a bubble where her worries felt lighter. They laughed softly at small things, shared smiles, and for the first time that day, she felt relief that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve and asked for another snack. She watched the father nod, his patience unwavering. She thought about the contrast between this quiet, simple moment and the chaos of the day she had endured. It reminded her that life had other sides, unexpected moments of kindness and understanding that could appear when least expected at one point. The man looked at her and asked gently, "Are you okay?" It wasn't the kind of question people usually asked in passing. It wasn't superficial. He truly meant it. She paused, unsure if she should answer. Then, slowly, she nodded. Not fully, but enough. Enough to acknowledge that yes, she was hurt, but she was also breathing, surviving, and for now, she was safe. He smiled again, and she realized she felt lighter. She had carried so much alone for so long that the idea of someone noticing without pity felt almost foreign. She had been seen, and it mattered, as they continued to talk. She noticed the boy had fallen asleep against his father's shoulder. The man gently lifted him, careful not to disturb him, and whispered something softly. She smiled at the tenderness. It reminded her that strength and care could exist together. That hardship didn't have to erase kindness. She realized she had been holding her own pain so tightly that she had forgotten small moments like this could exist. Moments that didn't fix everything, but reminded her that life wasn't only disappointment. The man glanced at her again and nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement and encouragement. She wanted to thank him, but words felt too clumsy. Instead, she simply smiled back, letting the gesture speak for her. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. She had shared, listened, and felt an unspoken connection. She didn't need solutions, advice, or promises. Just the presence of someone who understood and the quiet proof that even bad days could hold something unexpectedly good. When she finally stood to leave, she felt a subtle shift inside. The day hadn't gone as she had planned, but it had not been entirely ruined. She had encountered a kind of human connection that made the heartbreak of earlier seem less overwhelming. The man nodded at her one last time, and the boy waved softly from the father's arms. She returned the wave, feeling warmth she hadn't expected to feel that day. Walking out of the shop, the sunlight seemed different. Not brighter, not softer, just noticeable in a way that reminded her of life's quiet resilience. She had faced disappointment, but she had also found a flicker of hope she hadn't anticipated. She didn't know what the rest of the day would bring. She didn't know if her plans could ever be salvaged, but she carried with her the unexpected kindness of a stranger and the simple truth that even in the worst moments, human connection could remind you that you are not alone. For the first time that day, she felt capable of taking a deep, unhurried breath. The world outside continued its chaotic rhythm, but inside her chest, something had shifted. She was still facing a long road, still carrying the weight of disappointment. But she now knew that even in moments of despair, small acts of care could light a way forward. And she realized that sometimes, the people you least expect are the ones who can remind you that hope is still possible. Even when everything else has gone wrong, the days that followed her disastrous morning were quiet and heavy. But the memory of that small shop and the single dad with his child lingered in her mind. She found herself thinking about the kindness she had felt and the rare feeling of being truly seen. Life outside continued its usual pace, yet inside her, a subtle change was beginning. She went about her routine, doing her work and keeping up appearances, but there was a new awareness. Even in her sorrow, she realized that she could carry more than just pain. The warmth she had felt in that shop reminded her that moments of connection could exist anywhere, even in the midst of hardship. One afternoon, she decided to return to the shop, almost on impulse. She didn't know what she expected, perhaps a conversation, perhaps just a glimpse of the familiar. When she arrived, the man and his child were there, just as she remembered, sitting at the same corner table. The boy waved when he saw her, and she felt her heart lighten. It was a small gesture, but it carried a world of reassurance. They greeted each other without hesitation. The man's voice was calm and welcoming, and she felt a sense of ease she hadn't experienced in days. Conversation flowed naturally this time, not forced, not awkward. They talked about ordinary things, sharing pieces of their lives without pressure. She found herself laughing more easily than she had in a long time. He told her about the boy's school, the little victories and small setbacks, and how he tried to be both mother and father. She listened, genuinely interested, feeling a quiet admiration. His honesty and dedication struck a chord with her, and she felt inspired in ways she hadn't expected. She began to open up about her own struggles. Not the full depth, but enough to let the weight of the day start to lift. She spoke of the disappointment, the heartbreak, and the fear of judgment. He listened without interrupting, without offering cliché advice, simply acknowledging her pain. And in that acknowledgement, she found comfort. The boy, sensing a change in the atmosphere, became more animated. He asked questions, told small stories, and even teased gently. She responded with smiles and laughter, letting herself be drawn into the lightness he brought. It was refreshing, almost healing, to interact without any expectations, without needing to prove herself. As the afternoon passed, she realized that the man's presence had a subtle influence on her. His calm patience and quiet encouragement made her feel capable again. Not capable in the sense of achievements or recognition, but capable of facing the day. Capable of moving forward despite setbacks. They began meeting more often. Always in that shop or at nearby places where the child could play safely. Each meeting built on the last, a foundation of trust and mutual understanding. She didn't feel pressured or rushed. She simply felt accepted and valued. Through these moments, she started to see her own strength differently. She realized that resilience didn't mean never falling. It meant allowing oneself to heal, even when life seemed to crumble. She saw that asking for and accepting support was not weakness, but a step toward growth. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the buildings, she and the man walked along the quiet street after leaving the shop. The boy ran ahead, laughing at small imagined adventures. She felt a sense of normalcy she hadn't known in a long time, a feeling that life could still offer joy. She spoke about her hopes, not the big plans that had fallen apart, but small hopes for the future, for stability, for peace. The man nodded, sharing his own quiet dreams, always realistic, but never devoid of hope. They spoke honestly without pretension, and she felt a partnership forming, not romantic necessarily, but human. Real human connection, built on understanding and empathy. Days turned into weeks, and she noticed subtle changes in herself. She walked with her head a little higher, smiled a little more freely, and felt lighter carrying her burdens. The disaster of her big day was no longer a shadow that crushed her. Instead, it became a memory she could hold without letting it define her. The man became a steady presence in her life. Not intrusive, not demanding, but reliable. He offered quiet support, shared laughs, and sometimes simply listened. In his company, she learned the value of small, consistent gestures of care. How they could heal wounds more effectively than grand promises ever could. She began to notice beauty in ordinary moments. The way the sunlight fell across the table, the sound of the boy's laughter, the shared silence that felt comforting instead of awkward. Life had not gone perfectly, but it had offered her something even more precious: connection, understanding, and hope. Through their time together, she also saw her own capacity for kindness. She found herself reaching out, helping in small ways, offering encouragement, and sharing simple joys. It was a reciprocal growth, both of them learning from each other. She realized that healing was not a solo journey. It was a process enriched by human empathy. One afternoon, as they packed up to leave the shop, the boy hugged her tightly and whispered, "You make me happy." The words were simple, innocent, but they carried an impact she could not ignore. She felt tears well up, not from sadness, but from the realization that her presence could make a difference. Walking out together, she felt a warmth that contrasted sharply with the emptiness of her earlier disappointment. The single dad glanced at her and smiled, a small, knowing smile, acknowledging the subtle changes she had undergone. She smiled back, understanding without words that life, even when it seemed harsh, could offer redemption in small, unexpected ways. By the end of this chapter in her life, she had learned that resilience could coexist with vulnerability, that kindness and support could appear when least expected, and that healing did not erase the pain, but allowed it to become part of her strength. She no longer feared disappointment with the same intensity. She had tasted hope, and it was enough to keep her moving forward. Time passed, and the events of her so-called big day became memories she could recall without feeling paralyzed by disappointment. Life had not gone according to the plans she had carefully built in her mind, but it had offered something she had never expected, a lesson in resilience, in kindness, and in the quiet strength of human connection. She woke one morning with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The memory of the shop, the single dad and his child came to mind, not as a fleeting moment, but as a turning point. She realized that the disaster of her big day had not destroyed her. It had redirected her attention to what mattered in life. She had discovered that joy and support could come from the most unexpected places. Her mornings became steadier, her steps lighter. She still faced challenges, but she had developed a new perspective. Each small success, each simple act of kindness she encountered or offered, became a marker of her growth. She began to see that life was not defined by one day or one failure, but by the countless small moments that shaped her resilience. The single dad and his child remained a part of her life, a steady presence that required no grand gestures. Their bond was not built on drama or artificial circumstances. It was built on shared time, trust, and a gentle understanding of each other's humanity. She found comfort in their company and through them. She learned to let herself feel and express emotions she had long suppressed. One afternoon, they walked together in the park. The boy ran ahead, chasing leaves, laughing freely. She watched him and felt a sense of peace. The man beside her noticed her smile and commented softly, not needing to draw attention to her change, but simply acknowledging it. "You seem lighter," he said. She nodded. "I think I am." It's strange how one day can feel so heavy, and then later you see it differently. The worst moments can lead you to something unexpected. He smiled, understanding in his eyes. Life has a way of doing that. Sometimes it pushes us down so we can appreciate the moments that lift us up. Her reflection on the experience was clear. The disappointment, the embarrassment, the heartbreak she had felt that morning were all part of her journey. They had tested her, shaken her, but they had also opened a door to something she might have missed otherwise. She had discovered a resilience and depth within herself she hadn't known existed. She began to embrace small joys in life. Cooking a meal and savoring the flavors, taking long walks without rushing, reading a book simply for pleasure. Each small act reminded her that life continued, that beauty existed, and that she could still find happiness outside of expectations and plans. The bond with the man deepened gradually. They supported each other without pressure, shared quiet moments, and celebrated small victories together. The boy's laughter became a familiar and comforting sound, a reminder that life could be light even amidst challenges. She noticed a change in the way she approached setbacks. Where she had once felt defeated, she now felt determined, not for recognition or success in the way the world defined it, but for the growth she could achieve and the moments of joy she could nurture for herself and others. As the seasons shifted, she realized she had gained more than she had lost. The failed plans of her big day no longer seemed catastrophic. Instead, they had been necessary. They had created space for her to experience genuine human connection, to find strength in vulnerability, and to recognize the value of kindness and patience. She remembered the morning of her disaster, the fear, the heartbreak, and the humiliation. And now she could look back without anger, without regret. She understood that the pain had been part of the process, and through it, she had discovered a capacity for hope she hadn't realized she possessed. She began to help others in subtle ways, offering encouragement, listening when someone needed to talk, sharing moments of joy. She understood, more than ever, that small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways that changed lives. And she knew intimately the power of someone noticing, simply being present, without judgment. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, the boy asleep nearby, she reflected on the journey she had taken. She had arrived at a place of acceptance, a place where she no longer measured herself against expectations, but measured her life by the quality of her moments and the depth of her connections. The man looked at her and asked quietly. She nodded, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I do, stronger and lighter and lighter. More myself than I have been in a long time. The day I thought would ruin me didn't. It led me here to this. He nodded, and she understood that the true measure of her big day wasn't in success or failure, but in the lessons learned, the connections made, and the quiet transformation within herself. The nightmare she had feared had become a turning point, and the kindness of one man and his child had changed everything. As the sun set, casting golden light through the window, she felt a profound sense of peace. The world outside continued its unpredictable rhythm, but inside her heart, she carried clarity, hope, and the knowledge that even when plans fail, life has a way of giving back what matters most. Her journey was far from over. Challenges would come again, and days would not always be kind. But she had learned that, with resilience, empathy, and human connection, even the darkest days could lead to light. She had found strength she didn't know she had, and in doing so, she had discovered the true meaning of her big day, a day that had seemed like a nightmare, but had, in the end, changed everything for the better. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable, even joyful. The memory of the disastrous day that had once seemed like a turning point for failure had become part of her story, not as a scar, but as a reminder of resilience. She had discovered that life's hardships often led to unexpected growth, and the connection she had found with the single dad and his child had transformed her understanding of trust, care, and human kindness. She woke one morning feeling light, a rare sensation in the past year. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating the small, cozy apartment she had been able to furnish modestly but with care. The space felt alive with the effort she had put into it, and she moved through it with a sense of purpose that had once been elusive. Breakfast was quiet but pleasant. She prepared simple food, savoring the process. For the first time, she realized that enjoying these small, ordinary routines could bring genuine satisfaction. Life didn't always have to be about major accomplishments or big plans. Sometimes it was about moments like these. Moments she had learned to appreciate fully. Her phone buzzed with a message from the man she had come to trust. He wrote casually, asking if she wanted to meet for coffee later in the day. She smiled, her heart warmed by the thought. The boy had school, so it would just be the two of them, but she knew the simplicity of the encounter would be enough. She agreed quickly, appreciating the predictability of a plan that promised neither pressure nor expectations. When they met, the coffee shop was calm, a perfect backdrop for conversation. She noticed how the man's presence continued to bring her a sense of calm and security. They talked about everyday matters, the boy's latest achievements at school, her small victories at work, the simple challenges that life presented. There was a rhythm to their dialogue, a give and take that felt effortless and genuine. She realized that she had begun to look forward to these moments. They were not dramatic or flashy, but they carried a depth of comfort she hadn't known she was missing. In his company, she had learned the importance of patience, the power of listening, and the quiet impact of consistency. These qualities, she realized, were more valuable than the grand successes she had once chased so obsessively. They spoke about the past, too carefully. She shared some of the lingering fears and doubts that still surfaced occasionally, and he listened without judgment. He shared his own struggles as a single parent, the exhaustion, the moments of self-doubt, and the small victories that kept him moving forward. In hearing him, She felt a renewed sense of understanding that life's hardships did not define a person, but how they navigated those hardships did. After coffee, they decided to take a walk through the park nearby. The boy was home from school, and they joined them after picking him up. Watching him run ahead, laughing and chasing imaginary adventures, brought a fresh wave of joy to her heart. His innocence and energy reminded her that happiness could be found in simple things, and that life had a way of offering light even in unexpected places. She felt a sense of belonging that was new. It wasn't tied to perfection, success, or the approval of strangers. It was tied to genuine human connection, the kind that was steady, patient, and unassuming. She realized that the single dad and his child had become her anchor in many ways, a touchstone for emotional stability, support, and understanding. As they walked together, they talked about hopes for the future. Not extravagant dreams, but achievable, meaningful goals. She spoke about her desire to grow personally, to pursue opportunities that aligned with her passions, and to cultivate relationships that mattered. He shared his own aspirations for providing a stable, nurturing environment for his child, and the ways he sought to balance responsibilities with moments of joy. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter and quiet reflection. They shared moments of silence, too, comfortable and reassuring, as if words were not always necessary to understand each other. She realized that she had been starved for this kind of connection for much of her life, connection that was genuine, patient, and empathetic. In the weeks that followed, their bond strengthened further. They shared small adventures, visiting local markets, exploring the city's quiet streets, and spending time at parks where the boy could run freely. Each experience added depth to their relationship, building trust and a sense of stability. She learned the value of presence over grand gestures, understanding that being there for someone consistently mattered more than dramatic displays of care. She also began to notice changes within herself. She approached challenges with more confidence and clarity, understanding that setbacks were part of life but not insurmountable. Her self-esteem grew as she acknowledged her resilience, her ability to recover, and her capacity to find joy in small, everyday moments. She no longer measured her worth by societal standards or the success of a single day, but by the depth of her experiences and relationships. One evening, after a long day, they sat together on a bench in the park. Watching the sun set behind the buildings, the boy was asleep in the man's arms, exhausted from play. She felt a deep sense of peace, realizing that the life she had once dreamed of in terms of achievements had been replaced by something richer: connection, understanding, and the quiet joy of shared moments. She reflected on the day that had once felt like a nightmare. She remembered the fear, the heartbreak, and the humiliation. And now she could see that day for what it truly was: a catalyst for change. A push that led her to encounter genuine human kindness and a path toward personal growth. The day that had seemed to destroy her had, in fact, opened the door to something profoundly transformative. The man beside her noticed her thoughtful expression and asked softly, "Do you ever think about that day?" She nodded. "I do. I remember how heavy it felt, but I also see how it led me here. I've learned that even when things go wrong, life can offer unexpected blessings if you're open to them." He smiled knowingly. "Exactly. Sometimes the worst days bring the most valuable lessons." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift further. She had discovered resilience, empathy, and the subtle power of human connection. She had learned that joy could emerge even from disappointment, that hope could be found in small gestures, and that life's true measure was often in the people who showed up for you when you needed it most. From that day forward, she carried a new sense of purpose. She engaged more with the world, nurturing relationships, embracing challenges, and appreciating ordinary moments with gratitude. She continued to grow, not in the way she had once imagined, through achievement alone, but through understanding, kindness, and the ability to find strength in herself and others. Her journey had started with a day she thought would define her in failure, but it had led to something far greater. She had discovered the value of empathy, the importance of presence, and the transformative power of genuine human connection. What had once been a nightmare had become the foundation of her most meaningful experiences, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer alone. She carried within her the lessons of resilience, the warmth of human kindness, and the knowledge that hope could emerge even in the darkest moments. The day that had begun with fear and disappointment had ultimately changed everything, leaving her stronger, wiser, and more open to the beauty that life still had to offer.